Hello to all astrology enthusiasts. In this video, I want to discuss the full moon in Scorpio, which took place on May 12th, 2025, at the 22nd degree of Scorpio. And right away, I'll say that this full moon closes the period that began on November 1st, 2024. The waning moon will be in effect until May 27th, 2025. And I'll also mention that in November, the new moon in Scorpio was at the 10th degree. Now, the full moon is at the 22nd degree. Accordingly, we will analyze in detail the characteristics of this full moon, its symbolism, and what we should pay attention to, as well as what we were essentially supposed to arrive at as a result of this full moon in Scorpio. First of all, I want to point out that a full moon is a significant event in our lives that firstly happens every month. And secondly, it is a time when the moon is in exact opposition to the sun on the opposite side of the zodiac. Accordingly, the sun is currently in Taurus, and this configuration creates a very powerful energetic tension between our consciousness and subconscious, between our logic and intuition, and between the external and internal, between external events and our inner states. At the same time, the full moon is aimed at establishing balance, harmonizing these energies, and, so to speak, putting everything in its proper place. How does the full moon work in our lives? First of all, the full moon always symbolizes the peak of a certain cycle. That is, it's the moment when our ideas, our desires, or certain events or relationships that began at the new moon reach their climax and, in addition to being revealed, bring some result from our efforts. In other words, this is a time when the truth is revealed. It's a time when the tangible form of what we've been working on for the past 6 months becomes apparent. It's a time for gaining insights. This is a period for completing projects, relationships, and certain internal processes. In addition, the full moon always heightens our emotions. That is, the moon is responsible for feelings, intuition, and our subconscious. During the full moon, all of this is amplified. Sensitivity increases, irritability rises, and emotions seem to come to the surface. And of course, during the full moon, it's easier for us to express everything that has been suppressed up until this period. Naturally, on the negative side, this can lead to conflicts, or on the contrary, to cleansing and release. Also, during the full moon, we very often receive answers to questions we've been searching for a long time, or suddenly realize what we truly need. And usually, during this period, there are a lot of personal revelations, clarifications of goals, clarifications of situations, and an internal realignment. Because after all, the full moon is aimed at restoring balance, at harmonizing this inner and outer turmoil. Also, during the full moon, sleep disturbances can occur, especially on the very night of the full moon. The body's energy generally increases, but it is very unstable, and we may experience those very same emotional swings. Old traumas, certain memories just surface, and we start to relive all of it. And in general, the symbolism of the full moon is that the moonlight, in a way, illuminates the darkness. That is, the subconscious becomes conscious. Here, there is an opposition, yes, a struggle between the external and the internal. And these situations require balance. They require a compromise between these two poles. That's why the full moon is a time of truth. Many secrets are revealed precisely during the full moon, especially in relationships. Now let's discuss the characteristics of the full moon in Scorpio. Well, first of all, I want to say that this full moon is one of the most emotional and deepest. After all, Scorpio is a very secretive sign, or very deep, very intense and emotional. And here the full moon in Scorpio is about powerful transformations, about significant changes both within us and in the world around us. And this is a time when all these hidden processes, suppressed emotions, fears, passions, the shadow aspects of our personality, they all come to the surface thanks to the full moon in Scorpio, and with tremendous force. In addition, let me remind you that Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. Pluto is the planet of life and death, the planet of rebirth, the planet of power and profound personal crises. A full moon in this sign is never gentle. It seems to lay bare the essence, shatter our illusions, and demands real, honest, inner change. The essence of the full moon in Scorpio, first and foremost, this peak of emotional intensity. The emotions are deep, as I mentioned, sometimes even to the point of extremity, and this can manifest, for example, as resentment, some kind of anger, or very powerful, strong jealousy. Here, the full moon in Scorpio sharpens our sense of possessiveness, especially in personal relationships. It gives us very obsessive thoughts. It gives us the desire to control. And all of this can come to the surface, especially if it has been suppressed for a long time. Here, there is an unveiling of what is hidden, an exposure, because Scorpio digs very deep. And with such a full moon, considering that it is ruled by Pluto, and Pluto has gone retrograde until October, secrets, manipulations, betrayals, and deceptions will be hidden here. Here, the true motives of other people and our own will be revealed. There is a very strong pull towards psychological self-examination and revelations here. Nevertheless, this is a very favorable time for psychotherapy, for energy cleansing, for detox, for family constellations, for putting things in order, and for freeing ourselves from everything unnecessary in our lives. Because transformation is taking place, the old is dying. Scorpio is associated with the archetypes of death and rebirth. And the full moon in this sign brings precisely the completion of certain toxic connections, relationships, the end of a life stage, both internal and external, the loss of something very important, but for the sake of liberation and renewal. Accordingly, this full moon is like an alchemical process. We need to go through the dark night of our soul in order to emerge renewed. Naturally, during this full moon, issues of intimacy, trust, and dependency in relationships will also come up, because after all, Scorpio is the 8th house, and it specifically touches on our sexual desires and fears. It concerns topics of our sacred energy, our deep instincts, and bodily memory. Here, it is important to be able to recognize where sexual energy gives us strength and where, on the contrary, it destroys us. Naturally, it is necessary to get rid of toxic, intimate connections. In addition, the topic of power, control, and dependency will be raised here, as I mentioned. That is, there is an increased drive for power here, or on the contrary, a sense of complete powerlessness. There is a thirst to control situations, people, and oneself. During this full moon, the fear of losing control or being vulnerable may become activated. And this is the moment when it's necessary to free yourself from psychological attachments and dependencies, whether they are in relationships, in the workplace, or certain internal behavioral patterns that often repeat in our lives and seem to go in circles. So, what situations are possible during a full moon in Scorpio? First and foremost, if we're talking about relationships, there can be heart-to-heart conversations, revelations of infidelity, power struggles within the relationship, or a strong attraction to your partner may arise, or intense jealousy may surface, or there could be a sudden breakup, or on the contrary, a deepening of the bond. If we're talking about work and finances, this is a time when intrigues may be revealed. Collaborations may come to an end, responsibilities may be redistributed, or there could be sudden expenses or income, and issues related to debts or inheritance may come to the surface. After all, this is the 8th house. If we're talking about personal development, then we're definitely dealing with the psychological crisis of the individual. Here, a sense of identity crisis may occur. There is an increased desire to change oneself, to get rid of fears, and to undergo this kind of shadow, deep psychological work. If we're talking about the area of health, this may manifest as an aggravation of chronic conditions, especially those related specifically to the reproductive organs. After all, the 8th house is about the intimate side of life. Here, it is necessary to undergo energetic cleanses or detoxes, especially of a psychological nature, but also physical ones as well. There is a powerful activation of the shadow, an activation of fears, traumas, and unconscious programs. Let me remind you that we have Lilith in Scorpio, the black moon, which also adds another layer of energy here. And all of this can manifest through vivid dreams, flashes of intuition, and the realization of certain karmic behavioral patterns or life scenarios. The ruler of the full moon, Pluto, has been in retrograde motion, your chart for us literally, since the beginning, and its retrograde motion is happening in Aquarius for the first time. Moreover, retrograde motion amplifies all the themes I mentioned that are connected to the full moon in Scorpio, deep transformations, themes of liberation, and a reassessment specifically of social structures and connections. Because after all, these are Aquarian energies. Pluto's retrograde makes us to revisit past issues of power, control, and changes in society if we look at it in a broader societal context, and it directs us to seek new ways to break free from old paradigms in life that limit us. And naturally, retrograde Pluto will lead us to reconsider some of our past, transformation, especially those connected to social roles, belonging to a certain group or collective, or personal changes in relationships that, for example, may not have been fully realized or understood in the past. And during this time, with Pluto in retrograde, we may feel the urge to return to these unfinished processes that drain our personal power, or, on the contrary, increase control over us or create dependency. Now let's consider the symbolism of the 22nd degree of Scorpio. This degree is represented by the image of hunters shooting ma'am at wild ducks, the symbol of the 22nd degree. It reveals to us the theme of the socialization of our aggressive instincts, especially those related to the expression of masculine aggressiveness and emotional stresses. In this context, the symbol of hunting becomes a kind of cultural ritual that regulates and channels our primitive instincts into a safe direction. The symbol itself clearly emphasizes that aggression, which at its very core is something very natural and inherent to all living beings, can indeed be transformed into a socially acceptable activity. This can help prevent destructive consequences. It is also shown that a person is capable of resisting social aggression, and society accepts this aggressiveness as the norm, but as it were, it ritualizes it, that is, it cleanses it of its destructive context or character. And in this way, hunting here becomes a symbol of how our instinct human instincts can not only be suppressed, but also used to maintain social order, to preserve well-being specifically through specially organized practices and rituals. Now, I want to take you back to November 1st, 2024, when we had a new moon in Scorpio at the 10th degree. And the 10th degree is represented by the image of a friendly dinner that brings together old friends. And here, this symbol emphasizes the value of community and connections that arise in our lives thanks to shared experiences or working together toward a common goal. And this symbol draws attention to the fact that it is important for us to create and strengthen bonds with people with whom we have shared significant life experiences. After working together and accomplishing things as a group, we develop a sense of unity. And collective consciousness itself becomes the foundation for the formation of cultural behavior patterns or certain structures, such as social structures and institutions. The communal dinner itself symbolizes not only friendly relations, but also the process of forming a group identity, when collective energy becomes the basis for creating shared values. It also unites us through common emotions. This dynamic highlights the importance of establishing or strengthening social connections with those with whom we can truly share key moments of our lives. And in a social context, this can also mean strengthening cooperation and trust among like-minded people and those who have, so to speak, gone through common challenges together. And now let's trace the transition from the 10th to the 22nd degree of Scorpio. This transition reflects for us precisely the path from social unity and collective connections, which are based on shared experience, to the ritual expression of our innate aggression. At the 10th degree, we create and strengthen bonds through shared activities, through shared experiences, forming a common social identity and mutual understanding. And this is the stage when this camaraderie, these shared values, become very important for our development as individuals. But by the 22nd degree, we come to the realization that the aggression and emotions that were hidden or suppressed during the process of forming these shared values can, in order to avoid an aggressive outburst, they can actually be safely released precisely through cultural rituals, which were created as part of the implementation of the 10th degree. And this transforms our destructive instincts into socially acceptable forms. In this process, we actually learn to manage collective aggression, making it in a way part of the social context, a shared experience. And this, in principle, leads each of us to more mature, more harmonious relationships within society itself. Now, I want to clarify some aspects that are at play for us during the moment of the full moon in Scorpio. First of all, the Sun is already in conjunction with Uranus in Taurus. And here, this aspect creates a very powerful dynamic precisely for deep transformations, especially in matters related to our personal values, our finances, and material well-being. The Sun in conjunction with Uranus brings very sudden, very unexpected changes and can make us reconsider our attitude toward money, property, and the topic of stability. The full moon in Scorpio adds an emotional charge to this and encourages truly deep changes. That is, this is a time when we may face the need to free ourselves from material limitations or certain financial beliefs that are holding us back. And what is important here? It is important to be open to these changes and to use this opportunity precisely for cleansing, for freeing ourselves from old patterns. This may relate to personal values, material possessions, or our own resources. The main thing is that this aspect is suitable for re-evaluating your beliefs and approaches, and it can actually provide new ways and new sources of income or new means of self-expression. And naturally, the peak of this aspect will be closer to the 20th of May. The moon, and consequently our subconscious, are in opposition to Uranus in Taurus, creating a tense dynamic that can trigger sudden emotional upheavals and unexpected changes in our personal lives. The moon in Scorpio very actively affects our deepest emotions, instincts, and hidden motives. And Uranus in Taurus brings sudden, sometimes very destructive changes precisely in the realm of the material world in matters of our values and personal relationships. In other words, this is an aspect where our usual patterns, our ideas of stability can suddenly be undermined, and we are forced to confront what our subconscious has long been hiding. Moreover, this will manifest in very unexpected external circumstances. All of this will force us to rethink our attachments, our approaches to the topics of security, comfort, and stability. There is also the nuance that the moon is in conjunction with the asteroid Juno, also in Scorpio. Juno is currently retrograde. And of course, this conjunction specifically activates themes of relationships, our attachments and partnerships. It compels us to reconsider existing connections and to deeply, deeply analyze our emotional needs within relationships. The moon in Scorpio enhances our intuition. It amplifies the emotional, the intensity of our lives. It makes this period especially suitable for working with our subconscious fears, hidden emotions, and discrepancies in personal relationships. Juno is directly associated with the idea of marriage, partnership, long-term commitments, and harmony in partnerships. But it is in a retrograde phase and, of course, brings us, so to speak, takes us back to old problems. Some unresolved issues related to our personal relationships. Given that this is an aspect of conjunction, it can present us with situations that force us to reconsider our expectations in partnerships, our attachments, and to find that balance between our intimacy and personal freedom. Here, important questions will arise concerning justice, equality, reciprocity in relationships, and mutual obligations. And all of this may be subject to revision. In other words, this is a moment when we may realize that our need for closeness and trust has been suppressed, or that some old behavioral patterns and relationship scenarios no longer help us grow. They limit us instead. This is how this aspect can manifest. And naturally, in order to work effectively with the energies of this conjunction, it's important to open up to the theme of self-discovery and to the changes that are happening right now. This is also a good time to figure out which emotional blocks are preventing us from being truly honest with ourselves and with our partners. To be continued. This is a great time to work through old resentments and unconscious expectations in order to let go of all that and in the future build harmonious personal relationships. Let me also remind you that right now the Black Moon is transiting through Scorpio, and at the time of the full moon it is in a square aspect to retrograde Pluto in Aquarius.
In general, the presence of the black moon in Scorpio, especially in conjunction with the moon and retrograde Juno, gives everything happening a very deep, somewhat dark, almost magical and irresistibly alluring quality. And here it amplifies the theme of the shadow side of our attachments, exposes our hidden fears, and brings up taboo topics and suppressed desires. This can especially manifest in personal relationships. It's as if it pulls out into the open what is usually hidden behind a mask of outward harmony. This includes jealousy, fear of loss, the desire for power in relationships, and a passion that borders on destruction. And here, of course, Lilith in Scorpio definitely adds intensity to the full moon in Scorpio. It demands complete honesty with oneself. First and foremost, the exposure of illusions related to love, sexuality, loyalty, and personal vulnerability. And of course, in aspect with the moon, with our subconscious, it can trigger precisely these kinds of emotional crises. It can become a trigger for a very powerful inner awakening, so to speak, an awareness of where we have given away too much energy, where we have allowed fear to control our choices in relationships, where we ourselves have manipulated in relationships. All of this can be brought about specifically by the black moon. Square aspect to retrograde Pluto in Aquarius. Here there's an additional layer of energy, very intense, very tense. In other words, a tense field is formed for transformations related to the suppression of our instincts, the shadow sides of our power, control, and sexuality. In other words, this is one of those aspects that brings our subconscious face to face with the power of collective, let's say, collective transformation. And retrograde Pluto specifically draws our attention inward toward the unconscious, toward what, so to speak, remains unresolved. And Lilith, in this aspect, specifically touches on sharp issues that are connected, for example, with the abuse of power on a large scale, in relationships and structures, with the desire to control and suppress others. Here, there is a kind of struggle with inner demons, and topics related to energy, let's say taboo subjects and sexuality, are strongly activated. And all of this comes out, rises to the surface, uncomfortable truths about oneself, about the past, about connections. This especially concerns personal relationships and intimate scenarios where until now there has been silence, fears, some kind of repression. These two specific points at this particular moment in this aspect are presenting us with a very powerful and significant challenge. In the background, there is another disharmonious aspect at play, the square between retrograde Pluto and Mercury in Taurus. And this aspect creates a very strong, deep tension regarding our need for control. Here, the aspect is specifically aimed at controlling information, at controlling thoughts, everything related to our mental stability, to our habitual logical patterns of thinking. Here, there is a clash of at least different speeds of thinking, because Mercury in Taurus clings to tried and true, concrete and reliable ideas and facts. But retrograde Pluto in Aquarius wants profound transformations of our entire perception of the world. And under this aspect, there may be obsessive thoughts, psychological and mental pressure, and sharp arguments. In other words, situations may arise that are accompanied by these things. And here it is necessary to reconsider your values and your views. Everything that once seemed logical and stable in your life, when this aspect is present, it can bring about very painful changes, difficult realizations, and a heightened sense of awareness. These experiences may arise unexpectedly and can be quite challenging to process emotionally. At the same time, retrograde Pluto forms 3 sextiles to Venus, Neptune, and Saturn. These are supportive energies that create a powerful yet very subtle platform for the internal transformation of our values, our feelings, and our personal boundaries. So this connection with Venus, with Neptune in Aries, and Saturn, which is still in Pisces, inspires us to renew our relationships, to realize that true feelings, true love, and inspiration must come from the depths of the soul, so to speak. And here, of course, courage is needed, but it's important with all these factors not to lose your emotional sensitivity, because after all, Neptune can blur boundaries, even though it's in Aries. And as for Pluto, of course, it will activate all these hidden emotional layers, our subconscious desires, and all of this will be helpful. That is, the sextiles will help us cleanse our romantic and aesthetic ideals precisely from these illusions, from certain infantile manifestations and projections. And in addition, the sextile to Saturn in Pisces helps us integrate this transformation that is happening to us into the real structure of our lives, to strengthen our boundaries, not to lose our sense of compassion and empathy, to give shape to our dreams while not destroying this mystical essence. It's a very rare moment when our spiritual and emotional depth can actually become the foundation for building stable external connections and in general for rebuilding our lives from scratch with a new perspective. And one of the significant aspects at play during the full moon in Scorpio is the opposition between the karmic lunar nodes. This is an exact aspect. And here, the emphasis is specifically on the struggle between self and others, on the internal confrontation between control and trust, between our analytical mind and our intuitive faith. Here in general, this aspect will expose the tension between our desire to structure everything, to explain, to fix, and the need to let go, to trust the flow, to follow intuition, to follow some kind of spiritual truth. Let me remind you that the North Node is in Pisces, while the South Node is in the practical sign of Virgo. The essence of this opposition lies in realizing that our past manifests itself through constant analysis, through critical thinking, through certain experiences, and the desire to be useful. The South Node is in Virgo, but the true path of development lies precisely in acceptance, in compassion, in showing a kind of spiritual gentleness, in the ability to live with uncertainty, because the North Node is in Pisces. The energies of the full moon in Scorpio allow us to transform this fear, the fear of losing control, into an experience of deep emotional reset when, well, we need to let everything go. And this will allow us to cleanse not only our mind, but also our soul. And here it is very important to let go of excessive servitude. Here, it is important to seek something greater in life, some new meaning, perhaps connected to art, intuition, or spiritual practices. And this aspect during this period teaches us that not everything needs to be fixed. Much simply needs to be accepted. And in the next video, we will look at how the full moon in Scorpio affects the 12 zodiac signs. I wish you success. See you soon.